I'm Nick Terzo, and you are listening to The Radical. My guest this week represents one of those rare stories of someone who's been successful in a variety of roles. Grammy-nominated songwriter, corporate executive, and entrepreneur. He's written hits for artists such as Pink, Cher, Sting, John Legend, Jessica Simpson, and Celine Dion. His current venture encompasses a record label, artist management company, and branded entertainment agency. All this, and he remains an active force in advancing songwriters' rights. Multi-platinum songwriter Billy Mann joins me to discuss developing young artists and influencers in a TikTok world, his decades-long kinship with Pink, and, equally important, his remarkable efforts as a driving force for autism funding and research. Coming up, my conversation with Billy Mann. Hey, Billy, thank you for doing my show. I'm really grateful.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
It's my pleasure. You have a fascinating career because I think you've done about everything from, the creative side, the executive side, the entrepreneur side. So I think you have a view that's different than a lot of people's. It's not as myopic or one-dimensional. And your interest in young artists and how they develop, I think, is important. I think a lot of guys get to be our age and kind of get removed from that, which to me, that's still the thrill of it all. And I think you share that. So I kind of want to get into that a little bit.
It's good. It's weird because most people, their careers, I don't even think it's negative. I don't think their intention is to have a myopic point of view, but the industry tends to be like, oh, you're in this bucket. And there's a comfort level to that too. If you're a record executive and you're talking to someone, you say, oh, so-and-so's a manager, or so-and-so's an executive, or so-and-so's a songwriter or a producer or a publisher, you know where they belong in just the way you compartmentalize the business you do on the day-to-day. And then when you're a little off-roading like I am, you're able to approach it from a different kind of perspective taking. And I think, frankly, I don't think it's until I got a little older that I began to take proper advantage of those experiences in a way that was more objective and seeing situations through the eyes of other people instead of just through your own eyes, which is clearly a problem in the world, not just in our industry, but in general. So I feel lucky that I've had that perspective.
That's a great perspective. Let's just jump in kind of today where you are. I don't want to do a timeline here that would bore the hell out of you because you've probably done that a million times.
How do you explain some of the ground I've covered?
Yeah, well, we got to connect the dots of how you got to today. Course. So we'll do that a bit. So, but you've got currently you have like a label, right? You have something called Proof of Concept. And do you do any more branded entertainment work? You work with influencers.
We do a lot of branded. So my partner, Benton James, and I, Benton and I worked together at my previous company, which was Mann Creative Partners, and Green and Bloom Top Line was the publishing arm. And we worked with a whole cast of other folks, different artists, writers. Liz Baylog was one of the executives that helped build the company with me, and Benton joined many years ago. And Benton just has a superb perspective, as not just his perspective as an A&R executive, but he's also one of those people that sees things before they're fully formed and can interact and engage with talent at their infancy, and then identify based on his own instincts and see them through. So Super Mario is an example of that, who was a janitor in a mental institution and now is like one of the biggest producers in hip hop. The list is pretty long. I won't bore you or your listeners with it. But when Benton and I started thinking about what we wanted in this next chapter, which really took place, that ideation process was during the pandemic, where people had a bit of time to have an existential crisis and go, what do I want to be when I don't grow up? Proof of concept was really, it's just an obvious articulation of what we have to do anyway as music entrepreneurs, which is find things where maybe you don't have massive believers, and then prove your point and prove that concept and then scale it. So that was really where that name came up with, where we came up with that name. And it's primarily around developing talent, and using the digital environment as a means for doing it, both in terms of discovery and where our talent lives. And then working across with a lot of brands on installations, using music to further brand initiatives. So for example, we did an initiative for We're in This Together. And it was right before the election. There was a huge crisis and we needed to come up with a song. We did this in partnership with Gray Advertising. And we got Jasmine from the Hamilton cast, the original cast, and she sang this song. And then it just sort of blew up you get into the hundreds of millions of views. And that was something that we built together. And then on top of that, I met the D'Amelios with my friend Barbara Jones. And I've been advising them really since the beginning, and wound up co-writing Be Happy, which Dixie, one of the D'Amelios, just went gold. And I didn't set out to do that. Proof of concept is, if we're smart, we're elastic, we're allowing the market to help drive the business as much as we're driving the business to the market.
Got it. So I like it though, because there's no necessarily labels to it or any constraints on.
Well, I think it's still like a management business that does marketing and branding initiatives. And it's really fun. I think the other company that we started was Icons and Giants, which is a joint venture with Warner Music Group worldwide. We're using ADA. ADA is typically the plumbing. So you have companies that go to ADA, like a Hitco or a BMG, where they're really, the primary relationship is to use the distribution capabilities and that footprint. But for us in our conversations there with Kat and with Max Lusada, it's a real investment in developing projects together. So it has a lot more firepower than some of the other partnerships there. And then actually the last thing that we did is we've just launched something called Songhouse Live, which is an activation of 8 TikTok-based, social media-based talents that all are living in a house and with recording studios. And it's like, imagine being a teenager and someone coming to you and saying, you're going to live in a house, a mansion with recording studios and collaborators and other creators. And you're going to make music every day, all day for a couple months, get paid for it, and then build an audience greater. And also, have a shot at putting out a lot of stuff commercially. And that's something we're working on too.
Right. And you had a little experience with that, didn't you? Like when they did the stuff in Europe. What was that? The Castle or whatever, where songwriters would go over and kind of collaborate. I mean, it wasn't influencer house, but
that was really the first, but it wasn't an influencer house, but that concept, it was Miles Copeland, for, your listeners, some of whom are probably leaders, who, Miles Copeland was one of Sting's managers. And he owned this castle in France, and they would have cycles of writers, artists, and songwriters and producers that would go to the castle and stay for a couple of weeks and write songs every day in different studios. It's very similar, actually. And everybody would have meals together, very similar. And then you'd walk out with songs that you wrote. And I think the castle would participate in some of it. They would provide some of their writers that they had signed to it. It was a really smart business. And, and it was filled with lightweights. And I remember going there and writing me, Carole King, Greg Wells. So it was literally, it was insane, but it went on.
Was that a one-off or could you come back?
I did it a couple of times. And it was awesome. I mean, it's insane. And there are a lot of writing camps and these things that go on, but I don't think anything will top what that was.
Yeah. And with this Soundhouse concept, are there mentors around or people like yourself? Or are they kind of just on their own to create what they do?
Well, I think they're on their own because in part, a lot of them have the altitude and audience that they built themselves. So I don't want to go in and tell someone that something that isn't broken, how to fix it. And at the same time, there's like best practice or ideas or troubleshooting or just like, when you get stuck on a song, and then some of it's just the core writing. So we'll have writers that go in there, and it's really interesting.
Yeah. And let me ask you, like, look, you've had a remarkably successful career as a songwriter. As an artist or even as a songwriter today, I mean, I've seen you where you've spoken about artists being kind of overbooked and kind of having an abundance of choice. Their bandwidth feels like it's been pulled so far out now. Do you think that reflects on their ability to really concentrate on being, a great songwriter, a great artist? I mean, you've got social media they have to do, all of us clowns now with our podcasts here, it feels like their attention has been broadened so much. What are you seeing in that?
It's a really good question. It's hard for me to say because on the one hand, the music industry that you and I grew up in is a very different industry. And we can either look back and be nostalgic about this and say, do you remember the days where, an artist would fly into Philadelphia and play in the conference room at WMMR and they'd add the record and then the world opened up for them. And those days just don't exist anymore. So some of it is a little bit of, we want to hold on to that because there's a different romance to that. But what we don't talk about is the fact that the music industry was a collective dictatorship. It was an industry that said, if you want to reach the masses, you go through us or you go nowhere. And I remember when I started out, just the idea of getting a record deal was like, and it still is, it's still part of the whole Wizard of Oz myth. But, the idea of getting a record deal was to reach the world, to reach outside of your neighborhood or your city or even the region that you were in. You remember like the Heat Seekers chart. The Heat Seekers chart is irrelevant now because it's all digital. So yes, do I think that artists are stretched? But I do, comparatively speaking. But at the same time, for better or worse, the democratization of distribution, the access for distribution is so vast that in order to be able to cut through, I mean, listen, number one, music still has to be great, even if it's great bubblegum, even if great whatever. But in order to maximize that democratized access, you've got to play in all these spaces. You got 80,000 tracks a day, Nick. I mean, if you want to compete, you got to compete. So I don't think it's all things. This is a long answer, but I don't think it's all things with every artist. I think Adele made just a spectacular quality record. And on that basis, she played by her own rules over time. And then, there are records that come up. I don't want to say they're artists, but there are records that come up with someone who's big on the digital space. They have a moment and they go away. And I don't think we should expect a lot from them.
Right. Okay. That sounds, that encapsulates it well for me to understand that.
I mean, I miss it. Listen, I miss it. On my Instagram, I posted yesterday. I posted about my wife. It's her birthday, but I posted yesterday a clip of Patty Griffin and I playing together at a St. Louis bar. And we're playing and I'm talking and all you hear are just people talking. So it's like, I mean, Patty Griffin and I both have done pretty well in our careers. And here's this clip of the two of us playing, and people are like not interested. And my point on posting that, separate from it's kind of fun to watch now, is that followers and likes were a lot harder to get when we were out on the road then than it is now. And I think there too is why a lot of the artists, they need to do more, because they need to not just get them to sign in, but get them to stay.
Right. So don't overvalue the power of a like. I mean,
no, you should not. You value a comment a lot more than you value a like.
Right. And an add-on to that in a way is like, look, when you were coming up, you did the hard thing. You said, hey, I'm out of here. I'm taking my guitar. I'm loading up a car. And I don't know where my future's taking me. I've got no one here to help me. Every dollar I make is my own through my own ingenuity, my own creativity. How's that affected today? Today, it seems like it's become a little bit of a hobby and a little bit of a trust fund kid kind of sport. And have you noticed that change kind of economically?
I mean, yes and no. I think the work ethic and what people put into it and why they explore music, I think sometimes I think it's changed a little bit. I feel like songwriters are really the greatest entrepreneurs in the music business, because we basically are creating an invisible product out of thin air, sometimes with friends, sometimes on our own. And then we have to basically build a little micro business. And then we need to market and sell that. And we have a very limited amount of time in a very competitive environment to be able to do it. And not only that, we have to do it at faster than an elevator pitch timeline and in a wildly competitive, completely apathetic environment. And if we're lucky, then we have to let the market decide if it's real. Now, people don't look at songwriting as this entrepreneurial business proposition, but songwriters, I think, undervalue themselves and underestimate what is required, which is why a lot of songwriters need great managers or publishers if you get lucky. But it doesn't take away from the courage you need to have in order to go out and do that. And I think because every MacBook has GarageBand, which is, spectacular technology, even if it's not Pro Tools or Logic, it's still built in. And we could write a song, you and I right now, record it on an iPhone and upload it and have it be distributed globally in an instant. I think naturally it's going to erode a little bit of who gets where. And if you're a kid that has a trust fund, you can be a lot more risk-taking and freer than others. And by the way, I've been burned by some trust fund kids, where they like say, I want to do this. And we put in, the elbow grease as a publishing company. And then in the end they go, we don't want to do a deal after you've gotten them cuts and done stuff. And I scratch my head and I think, separate from where I grew up, that behavior wouldn't be appreciated.
Be some broken knees going on. So.
I think it's more, I feel like there's an entitlement to the access that we didn't have. I think it just required a little bit more, or I shouldn't say more, a different kind of more.
Right. And so you've also kind of been around the branded entertainment world now for almost 2 decades, I'd say. You sold your first company, right? It was successful. You sold that to EMI. Is that who you sold that to?
Yeah.
Which I have to get into because I think you were there during the Terra Firma drama. Yeah. I'm just curious, a little curious. So what have you seen kind of in that space? Like, what have the changes been like kind of over the last 20 years?
I have to say a couple of things about the Terra Firma chapter. Because,
please
do. First off, it was one of the best chapters of my career. And I'm in what I feel is the best chapter. And I think I've had a few best chapters, but that was awesome. And when I say that, it was difficult, completely a shit show in many respects. But what people don't take into consideration when they look at that period of the music business is the music business is so, we are so full of ourselves. We're so convinced that we're the center of the universe that what transpired with EMI, which was already in pretty terrible financial shape going into that acquisition, is like we forget it was the worst economic collapse in our lifetime, other than the Depression. And I don't know if anybody working at record companies was alive during the Depression, but it was the worst. Like, not a little bit. It wasn't a correction. It was a real collapse. And so the fact that other companies either had a parent company that had the fortitude and the financial stability to subsidize their survival to weather that storm, like Sony is not Sony Music on its own, even if the P&L stands alone. And frankly, EMI was a publicly traded company that went private. So what's interesting to me, and I'm saying this because there are a lot of mistakes that Terra Firma made and Guy Hands made in judgment that I know that he would raise his hand, and so would others, and say, I underestimated that, or this was the wrong decision. And, and there were certainly a host of people that say, oh, Billy's the wrong guy, you should have never hired him. And frankly, they were probably right, except I walked away with more hits than anybody during that transition, except for maybe Mike Dungan. And I was an underdog. But the decisions that were made tactically are decisions that, while the industry as a whole the industry was able to understandably use Terra Firma as a kicking post during these terrible economic times, the things that went on are now things that are industry standard.
That's what's interesting, huh? That's the point right there.
The bifurcation of new music revenue and catalog. Right. So you can't sign something, have it stiff, but you cover your losses because the greatest hits of whatever big act is going to cover that. So you can't do that. The implementation of data insight and digital, which I think was largely poorly executed until there was a point where they created a digital lab that had a series of segments, audience segmentation, which everybody was like, what is this shit? Which, by the way, now not only does the whole industry use it, but, Universal Music has brilliant executives like Dirk Bauer sitting in Berlin doing all kinds of intelligence, digital analytic work around music. So that, everybody said, is crazy. But they're all doing that.
How about private equity being involved in music, right?
Well, right. And so, and the belief that digital is the future. And the first company that actually invested in Spotify was EMI. And it was Stefan Blum and myself. And Stefan, of course, went on to become the COO of Spotify. So there were a lot of things during that era that were super imperfect. But for me, I got an incredible education and I had a lot of hits. Despite the turbulence, and I met incredible people, and the whole industry went through it. I mean, that started, and in the first year was the iPhone.
Right. So
I can't blame everything on Terra Firma, and I don't think anybody else can either.
Yeah, it was definitely a pile on at that moment in time.
But why shouldn't it be? Well, why shouldn't it be?
Yeah, I suppose. What was your, coming from where you came from, songwriter, I'm an entrepreneur now, I'm doing brand entertainment work. Now I'm on the executive side. I'm sitting at the other side of the table, kind of. What was kind of most striking to you about having that job? Was there a new respect found for it? Clearly, I think. What surprised you the most?
I mean, I actually found it interesting that the executives that we as artists always look to be there with all the answers, that the executives don't have the answers. And it's not that we don't know that, because anybody can look at it and say, if the executives had all the answers, why would there be so much turnover or churn? Or why would they be there working for a larger company? Because if they had the answers, they'd be entrepreneurs and doing it themselves. So I think what I got to understand and hopefully acquire is that a lot of the skill sets that go into being a great executive is not that I've got golden ears bullshit, because that's not what it is. What it is the ability to delegate and motivate people and to listen to the river better. And the industry in the past, which was a push business, like, here's Nick Terzo's new band, we're going to really push it. Remember that this was what we looked at. And today it's a pull business more than ever. It's like you see something that has an audience and the audience is pulling. So instead of pushing, you're actually letting this is a bad analogy, but sort of the fishing rod. When you're trying to catch the fish and it bites, you actually need to let it roll for a minute and learn more, and then take in that information and assess how you harness that and reel in what you need to get done for the company and the artists and everything else. And I feel like those are skills that I undervalued. I really thought it was just like somebody who had a healthy ego, and which I think is also required because you're going to take a lot of shots. And when you have an opinion that people don't like, you got to, all of a sudden some artist or their manager hates you because you don't like what they do. I mean, that can be hard, but I have such a respect for the executives, the ones that really know how to balance that well. And I don't think I had an appreciation for it until I was in that place.
Interesting. Yeah. Kind of curious. Since I was in that place, I was curious what a songwriter and a creative person going into it, how it was perceived.
Weird. It was definitely weird. But I think the part that I liked the most is that I wasn't afraid to be wrong, because I'm going to be wrong a lot. But I wasn't afraid to be accountable, because I can't be fired. I mean, one of the interesting things, I can't be fired from being a talented songwriter. My ideas can get dusty and irrelevant, but if someone fired me, it's not like, oh, I'm out of work forever, or I got to go look for my next gig. And that's a privilege that I had that a lot of executives don't have. So, which leads to why there's so much politicking.
Right.
I don't know, untethered. And somehow I managed to make my way through it.
That's awesome. So into songwriting we go again. And, I saw the Pink documentary on Netflix. And I've known for years kind of following her, how vectored she is, how dedicated she is. But man, that really brought it home, man. It was like, holy cow, how is she juggling all this? Tell me a little about your relationship, because it's been an ongoing relationship. It wasn't like you wrote one song and that was the end of it. You guys have been together writing for what, 10 years, 12 years? 20 years. Holy cow.
Yeah. It's just very unusual. And every time she goes to make a record, I always say to her, I get it. Like, you need to work with the sexiest, coolest, hippest, whatever in the moment. And there'll come a point where she'll be like, yeah, no, I'm going to work with this crew now. And every year that she goes to make a record, she, thankfully, she still's like, let's go in and see what we got. And I think she's also given me the room to explore my own weird journey. And I'm not cool. I've never been cool, Nick. So that means like, I'm not going to, like, there are a lot of collaborators that she works with, and they're all amazing, and they're all a lot cooler than I am. And I think what makes her special is her not caring about that stuff. And I think if there was a moment where she cared, is the moment that she won't make a record that sells, that she won't connect with people, because her not caring is part of the magic of who she is as an artist and as a person. And what she did in the documentary was illustrate the imperfection of trying to do everything, which is really hard. It's hard for any mom or parent who's in any job, let alone the idea that you live this rock star life, and in the middle of an interview, you've got like basically your baby's duty on your hands. You're changing a diaper and you're trying to be rational. And, you know, she's unusual.
What is the bond between you two, though? What do you think you guys share? I mean,
I think that it's a sibling style relationship. Like we are, it's not, we don't like, we're not on the phone every day. It's not like that. It's not a frenetic thing. It's like a very, I love her. I love who she has become as a person. And I enjoy seeing her success, but not just like the stadium moments are great. Like I wrote this song with her called I Am Here, which is really a big moment in the documentary. And for any songwriter, if you write a song or produce a record and you see Wembley Stadium freaking out, singing along to something that you created out of thin air, the entrepreneurs that we are as songwriters, it's like, it's insane. And anytime I see her or any of the artists I've written for playing in any venue and you see people singing and taking part in that creation is like it's nuts. But I think what I hope the world realizes with Alicia is that she's who she is on the stage and who she is in the record she makes. It's not a far bridge to cross to who she is as just a person who's just trying to be a wife and a partner and a mom and a sister and a friend. And that's the part about the documentary that I loved the most watching, because I've seen it for years. But it was just amazing that she made the effort to share that with people. I think our bond is based on the Philadelphia background that we both have. We both grew up, we're kind of tell it like it is, folks. I once punched a paparazzi in the face in Stockholm, carrying her out of a bar. I've never spoken of that. I don't think you should use that as a highlight. We
get out of the country safely.
Yeah, we did. I definitely worried because, it wasn't the only camera there, but, but she's, and by the way, I think she would have punched.
I would say she probably would have done it, right?
She would have done it if I didn't. And I think I think that, let me say this about her, because I really love bragging about her. I don't know why I've gotten to have such a great relationship with someone for so long. But I think she's taught me an enormous amount about songwriting and about creative courage. And hopefully I've managed to create a safe environment for her to try shit and not fail. So it's a very special friendship.
It's incredible. I mean, I thought I knew a little bit about all of her qualities, but in watching that, I learned so much more, the tug on her, the unassuming way she is, considering she had to go and perform in front of 70, 80,000 people. It's just, wow.
Yeah, no, she's the best kept, not secret global star on earth.
I think that's the truth.
Yeah.
I think that's the truth. And her fans definitely demonstrate it. Wow.
Yeah.
So, look, with songwriting right now, I mean, with all these different platforms, I mean, you have definitely a forward-thinking view of things. There's a new songwriting organization, the Pact here, right? Where they're trying. I
signed it.
Did you sign to that?
I 100% did.
Which is, well, I'm going to let you explain it because you signed it. So,
well, no, it's basically, look, right now the paradigm needs to shift, and there needs to be greater fairness for songwriters. And that's not, to anybody listening to this is not greater for songwriters because songwriters are victims or we're feeling sorry for ourselves. Literally, just the balance, the economic balance, is completely off balance in profound ways. And it's one of the reasons why I think what Merck is doing with hypnosis is of particular value to songwriters, because he will not have the conflict that the major companies have. So just to explain, if you have Universal Music Group, the biggest, most powerful company in the world, and they have their record companies, all amazing record companies, Capitol, Interscope, Republic, etc. And they know that on the records, the record company master owner gets 70% of the revenue, and the songwriter, let's say the songwriter gets 2% or 5%. I'm just making up a number, but real imbalance. Let's say 30%. And it's not, but let's say that. If the songwriters are pissed off because they're not getting their share, the record companies are going to advocate hard to keep their share. And the publishing companies are going to advocate hard to increase their share. But what happens when it's the same company?
Right.
So basically, Universal has a left pocket of their pants and a right pocket of their pants. And the right pocket is like, we deserve more than we have. And the left pocket is like, yeah, no, you don't. And really, the person that wears the pants, they get all the money anyway. So they're not really incentivized to rebalance that in the way that they should. And the Pact and Sona in LA, these are statements and organizations that are trying to create greater parity for songwriters. So, and one of the challenges is that years ago, major artists who are not songwriters would go to working songwriters and say, okay, if you want me to cut your song, I'm now a writer on the song and you need to give me X%. And if you don't do it, I won't do your song. Which, by the way, if you're a songwriter, that's the only way you make a living. You're not selling concert tickets. You're not selling T-shirts. All you're doing is you are writing these songs, and that's the lifeblood of your career. So I'm married for 20 years. I have 4 kids. If I want to feed my kids and a big artist would turn to me and say, I'll cut your song, but I'm a writer on the song, or you don't get a cut, then what am I going to do? I'm stuck. So what are they doing? They're strong arming songwriters. And this has been going on for a long time. And what the Pact is doing is it's saying, a bunch of established songwriters are saying, if you don't contribute meaningfully to the creation of the song, we're not giving you a piece of it. That should not be controversial, Nick. That should be any given Tuesday or day of the week. So first of all, how ridiculous is that a bunch of us had to get together and sign a letter that says, basically, don't strong arm us into giving you equity in something you didn't create. And without naming names, just this week, I wrote on a record with some big artists, and one of the big artists, through another person, said, oh, we need to have a piece of it. And I said, I signed the pact. The answer is no. And everybody was freaking out. But you know what? It's going to happen, because great songs are going to get their day, and artists are going to need to rethink things. And in going back to the Castle, I saw Carole King was the first writer, and granted it's Carole King, but the first writer that I saw that stood up and said, I'm not giving anybody a piece that they didn't write. But she's Carole King. But the rest of the writers who were unknown were like, just give a little piece. Like, I don't care, because I just want the cut. And then, right. and eventually they got the cut, and Carole King got the cut, but she's Carole. But if you're not Carole King, you're going to get pushed around. And I can tell you, I worked with a lot of artists and got a lot of cuts. And I can't say that all of the artists that I worked with actually did the writing.
Right.
But I had kids and a family, and I did it. So I'm grateful that I can say no.
Right. And I'd imagine that pressure wasn't only the artists too, because, it
was the artists.
If I wasn't an ethical A&R guy in the 90s, I'm sure I could have gotten some writing credits, right? Which I have zero of. So,
I mean, I don't want to name names, but there's one A&R person who's since passed away that I remember. I know songwriters would come in with bags of cash and get cuts on records. And you probably know the person too.
Probably. So, no, I understand. But I mean, what you've got going on here, and the PAC's one part of this, right? I mean, but
right.
I mean, this is an ongoing, I mean, you guys are going to have to, even with the Music Modernization Act, I mean, it's a long way to go here, man.
That's right. But again, I go back to what hypnosis is doing. And I think Merck is trying to get enough leverage with enough power. And the catalog is also concentrated that I think he will be able to make a compelling case in a different way for writers and publishers, because he's not owned by one of the major record companies that doesn't have the incentive to care, because it's both pockets on one pair of pants.
Right. I can see that. I think his challenge, the only challenge he'll have is, I think he's got a lot of fractional ownership, which just puts you in a tougher position to some degree, right?
I think yes and no, because even fractional ownership, you're incentivized to maximize the life and breathe new revenue into existing catalog. And I think rights holders, songwriters, frankly, estates, they want to generate revenue, not just for themselves, but they want to continue relevance for the work that exists in their catalogs. So even shared equity in something it's still equity. You can still approve or not approve of a license. You still have a leverage point. Okay.
I'll accept that. So let me ask you before we kind of head out here. I have two more questions for you.
Anything, man. I told you I'm
one is, you have a real work ethic. You've never stopped. I was just curious, what are your rituals around in your practices, around creativity and songwriting? What's been most successful for you?
I'd say to songwriters, I would tell songwriters to read a lot. And I'm not practicing what I preach as much this year because of the pandemic. But I feel like the more creative input you can get, the better and more qualitative the creative output. What artists write about and songwriters write about is life experience. And if you can add to your personal life experience the stories and the delicacies and the vocabulary and whatever of other people into that bank that you draw from when you go to create, I think that's always good. I would say, I would just tell anybody that the best ritual is to tell the truth. Even if you don't want to say your whole intimate truth out loud, you can draw from your life experience and use it as a therapeutic vehicle to say real things, true things. And I think that's where the best music and songs are born from, that place. We just signed an artist named Black Bach, which is BLKBOK. And he's an amazing pianist, classical pianist, but he's also, his career is built being the MD and playing keyboards for Rihanna, Demi Lovato, John Mayer, Justin Timberlake. He's an amazing guy. And during pandemic, he created this classical album, the neoclassical piano album, called Black Book. And it's an incredible body of work that's really an articulation. He's like, I'm a rapper with my fingers. Like, he really created classical works of art that were mirror reflections of how he experienced the pandemic, Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, the election, a personal loss. And it's just like, it's amazing, this album. I would tell anybody to stream it, BLKBOK. Drawing from your own life is the most powerful tool you can use as a songwriter. That would be my advice to anybody.
I'll take that. So, and I can't have you leave without talking about kind of the incredible work you've done around autism and autism research, and as an advocate and as a father. And I don't know, man. I don't know what to say to you. I mean, your work there has been just astounding.
Thank you for bringing that up. It's important to me. My kids are important to me. I think the autism community is really complicated, really complex. It is a spectrum for a reason. There's no two individuals with an autism diagnosis are the same. There's like nothing uniform about it. And which means there's an incredible community of gifted individuals, activists, voices, perspectives. And at the same time, it's such a broad spectrum that it's hard to wrap your arms around it. I can only speak from my experience as a dad and say that 1 in 6 kids have developmental challenges, autism notwithstanding. And a lot of what I've found is that having a child with a disability is a superpower. It's made me a much better person, a much better executive, a better songwriter, a better husband, and I think just a better, more aware person. And I think that, and it's also, it can be a lonely experience for a lot of folks in the music industry that I know who have both people in the music industry who are on the spectrum and people who are parents and siblings of those on the spectrum. So I just feel like I want to do my share and in serving the community. And probably the thing that I'm most proud of is how many music people have supported me and the work that I've gotten to do. And it's also, what I'll tell you is of anything I've ever accomplished in my career, and I'm grateful to have a lot of metal on the wall, but I would say standing in the Oval Office with my son and my wife and having President Obama hand the first pen of a law that I worked really hard with a bunch of people and organizations to get passed for autism funding. I don't think I'll ever be able to top that. And for my son who was there, who's not verbal, I just hope that when we walked out of the Oval Office, that the residual royalty of that is the knowledge that, like, as parents, my wife and I will go to any length possible to fight for the community.
That's awesome. That was HR 2005, right? 2005.
Yeah.
Is there new legislation? Is there any more funding on the funding front? What's going on?
Well, what's interesting is there's one of the cool things that happened is that the autism research funding, because it's research implies cure, and cure is controversial. So, and I don't want to, I think cure is I think it's an unfair word. And I don't think it's applicable here. I think the research is about improving the lives of people on the spectrum. Should they choose to want to have alternatives that help make maybe certain things easier, and have medical breakthroughs that don't stop a human being with autism from being who they are, but help make it an easier path to be who they are. So that's important for me to articulate from my perspective. And this may bore the hell out of your listeners, but
I don't think so.
But I do think that what was discovered is that there's real correlations in terms of Alzheimer's and other neurological disorders. And there's a lot of overlap in terms of research. And so I think the consolidation of some of that funding and know-how is a positive thing. It's interesting for me to see how that unfolds, because there's still a lot of dysfunction in any government funding for anything. But what I do know is that autism, whereas when my son was diagnosed, was not really a front and center thing that people spoke about. And he's going to be 19. Now it's a much more open discussion, and I'm grateful that we could play a small role in that. And frankly, a lot of music people played a role in helping me do that. So, and now, of course, that leads to, it's not like autism is like a childhood thing and then it goes away. It's a lifelong thing. So you have massive unemployment of adults with autism who are awesome and can work and do things and be, frankly, incredible employees, but you still have a 70+% unemployment rate too. So there's a lot, there's a lot to do, and there's a lot of causes. And I know this isn't the only one, but this is the one that knocked on our door, and that's what it is.
Well, there was a reason, and you responded. So it's good.
I think Jenna, my wife, and I, we're pretty, we know we're privileged, the position we're in, and we still have to advocate for our kids, go with lawyers against school districts. And we live in, when he was diagnosed, we lived in Park Avenue. So I didn't grow up there, but even there, we still had to fight hard to advocate, and we still have to do it. So if we have to do it, part of what motivates us is just thinking of what any average person just trying to pay rent who has kids, what they have to go through. And it is not easy.
No, I see that. I mean, it's got to be incredible for people that are kind of on the cusp financially.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. Well, thank you. Listen, thank you for sharing that. I know it's personal, and but it's so important now. And I have so many friends that have, a child, a brother, sister.
Yeah.
It's very common now. And I don't know if that's due to testing or if that's just due to whatever it is.
Due to, it's the when my son was diagnosed, it was 1 in 166, and now it's 1 in 38.
Holy cow.
So maybe some of it's testing. Maybe I don't think. What I'll say is I don't think it actually. I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but I think what we know is that it's there, and there's a whole diverse community of voices that wants to be heard, and we got to figure it out.
Right on. So, well, thank you very much for doing this. I'm really grateful.
Thank you for having me.
I look forward to seeing what comes from Billy Mann in the future here.
Yeah, me too.
All right, my friend. Stay healthy.
Thank you, Nick.
Speak to you soon.
All right.
Thank you for listening. This show originates from the podcast capital, Austin, Texas. My producer is Sean O'Neill. Visit theradicalpod.com for updates and even some merchandise. Also, please subscribe at Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I also ask that you please share episodes with your friends so we can continue to grow our community. See you all again next Friday.